Edge of the stage, you can see when you leave, which are some upcoming programs between now and early June. And the plan is to build on the energy of the high-quality traditional arts performances, which are the hallmark of the Lowell Folk Festival. How many here have been to the Lowell Folk Festival? So you know that what happens there. And we're going to be offering similar experiences, obviously smaller ones, all throughout the year here at the park. So I'm going to hand things over to my colleague, David Blackburn, who's going to tell you a bit about today's program and introduce our guests.
Good afternoon and welcome. We're thrilled to have you here for the kickoff of our new series of folk programming throughout the year. But I think you're all here for one reason. What's on Monday? Valentine's Day. And what is the one consumable that is often associated with Valentine's Day? Chocolate. Well, in this country, when we think of chocolate, we might be thinking of something as ubiquitous as Hershey milk chocolate, our good friend Russell Stover. Perhaps, I grew up in California, so this is what I associate with chocolate. Ghirardelli, a good Italian name. Perhaps you might think of Godiva, maybe a little higher end, perhaps pseudo-European. I believe the owner of Godiva is Campbell Soup Company. Or you might think of other European chocolate traditions. I pulled this from my cupboard, Drost, imported from Holland, cocoa. There is something that all of these share in common, and that is cacao, the cocoa bean. There's something else all of these share in common. Despite our association with Europe, with Hershey, Pennsylvania, or with some unknown multinational, we're looking at something that shares an ingredient that's not European, that's not from Pennsylvania. It is native here to the Americas, but it's native to an area to our south, a place that we now know as Mexico and Central America. Today, we see a profusion of food culture in the United States, and we're beginning to see, with the changes in the way we perceive food, with the growing and the changing demographics in our country, and also in the Merrimack Valley with an increase in our population of peoples whose first language was Spanish, we're seeing new chocolate traditions. And that's what we're here to look at today. Mexican chocolate traditions in Massachusetts. For those of you who probably guessed, chocolate is a huge money-making industry here in the United States. In 2006, actually in the world, global sales of chocolate were $75 billion. 16 billion was solely in the United States. What we're looking at, though, are products such as this, Doña Maria mole, or something this. I bought this when I was visiting my parents, chocolate Moctezuma. We're looking at chocolate from its roots and where it came from. Interestingly enough, you can go to our good friends in Hannaford, and what do we see? Chocolate cake. But we see hot chocolate, chili and chocolate make a happy couple in sweet and savory dishes. Even the doyen of good taste, Ms. Martha Stewart, she's focusing on chocolate, but she's turning to new chocolate traditions. So today, to explore these chocolate traditions in Massachusetts, we have Mr. Alex Whimore, the co-founder and co-owner of Haza Chocolate in Somerville, Massachusetts. And we're very pleased to call up to the stage from right here in Lowell, down Merrimack Street, Maria and Ricardo Candiani, the owner of Mr. Jalapeno. So we'll be exploring one Mexican chocolate tradition from now manufactured in Somerville, and then Maria and Ricardo will be talking about mole from their perspective of restaurant owners, but also from their perspective of natives of Hermosillo, Mexico. So to start off with, we will be looking at the unique traditions now being explored with Haza chocolate. So, Alex, perhaps, are any of you familiar with Taza? Perhaps, Alex, how is it that a chocolate product that is deeply meshed in the traditions of southern Mexico and Oaxaca comes to Somerville, Massachusetts? If you could talk a little bit about the inception of your company, what you're doing, and the product that you're creating.
Sure. Well, I've always been into food and eating well, and knowing where my food comes from. Well, that latter half, I guess, I developed over the last 10 years during what I like to consider the American food revolution, which has been afoot for a while now. But how did I start this company? I basically wanted to start my own business. I was inspired by some entrepreneurship that was happening around me. I used to work for a company called Zipcar, which is a really interesting car sharing business that started up, and I was one of their earlier employees, and I was totally inspired by the entrepreneurship that I saw there. So that was one part of it. The other part of it was I really loved food, I loved chocolate, and I was like, well, if I'm going to start a company, I want to start something that I was passionate about. But I didn't really know what kind of chocolate business I wanted to start. I thought originally that I wanted to start a chocolate cafe. And I happened to be an anthropology major in college, and I remember studying Mesoamerican civilizations, and I was inspired when I was trying to figure out this business and write this business plan. I was inspired to take a trip to southern Mexico, to Oaxaca de Juarez, to visit what I remember being kind of where the hub of Mexican culinary traditions resided, and I wanted to see what they were doing with chocolate down there. And when I got there, this was right before we started Taza Chocolate, I was blown away by what I saw. I saw millers grinding everything, all sorts of food stuff. They had this amazing food milling tradition there. Everything from dried chilies to corn to rice to make atoles. To of course cocoa to grind into chocolates, and you'd see these people go into these millers shops, and they would order chocolate, and they would order it with a certain amount of pounds or kilos of cocoa bean, a certain amount of cinnamon, maybe some almonds, and the molineros would grind whatever concoction you wanted them to grind into chocolate. They mix in sugar, grind it again, and they give it to you in this big bag of hot chocolate. This amazing thing. And seeing people walk out of the store with just a big bag of fresh ground chocolate and take it home, and they have this amazing tradition of drinking chocolate in southern Mexico. Much like we drink coffee, they'll drink chocolate every day. And they take it home and they lay it out on the counter flat, and they score it so that they can easily break pieces off after it hardens. And that's actually the inspiration behind everything that we do at Taza Chocolate. And actually why we call the company Taza Chocolate. It comes from the Spanish taza de chocolate, which means cup of chocolate, retrieving chocolate. So it's a call out to the roots of chocolate solely as a beverage. And all the chocolate that we make is entirely stone ground in the Mexican tradition. That was the inspiration.
Great. So you're coming from a perspective of immersing yourself in a tradition from the south of Mexico. And Ricardo and Maria, you're from the north of Mexico.
That's correct.
Hermosillo.
Hermosillo, Sonora, in the border with Arizona.
Okay. So how far would Hermosillo be from the border of Arizona? Driving? 2 or 3 hours?
3.5.
Yeah, you drive fast.
It's 3 hours, 3 hours.
It's like 100 miles, 120 miles.
So although it's very, Hermosillo is high desert as opposed to the tropics of southern Mexico. But with some of these things that Alex is talking about are these traditions that you connect with and that you share through the tradition of not sweet chocolate, but savory chocolate and mole.
Well, what I was saying is more traditional in the south of Mexico. We're not very crazy for the chocolate in Arizona. I mean, in Sonora. Those traditions are more for the south, from Puebla, Mexico City, we know with the Aztecas starting. Sonora is more like coffee, and we are very close to the United States, so we have a lot of American lifestyle. You know, we can go to shop in the United States sometimes. You know, to do groceries, but we don't do a lot of chocolate in Sonora.
So even without growing up with that tradition, in your restaurant, you serve mole.
Yeah, every authentic restaurant should have mole. If they don't have mole, they're doing something bad.
This is one of the
Yeah.
Mexican restaurants.
Mole is, I think, is one of the most popular dishes in the restaurant industry.
In Mexico as well as.
Even in Mexico and also United States.
So Maria, when we were talking with you, you shared something that you were describing mole in your perspective, perhaps as restaurateur, is almost being representative as becoming the national dish of
That's correct.
Mexico.
Yes, it's very, very popular. Then they call it the national dish of Mexico because when you hear mole poblano, that's the original. There is different kind of moles, and there is one in Oaxaca, there is one in Tlaxcala, is another state, and another one in Puebla. The most famous is in Puebla, Mexico. It's in the south too, and they started over there. In the mole poblano, that's the name of the dish, is the national dish of Mexico. There is hundreds and hundreds very famous dishes, but the mole is like the name Mexican. And back in Mexico, you always, it's one of, now with these times that everything is fast and everything, they sell those jars, and which is all prepared. You just add the chicken broth and put it, of course, you make melt it and being like more liquid, heavy, and then you add just the chicken or turkey, or sometimes pork. A lot of different ways to cook it, but it's very easy and very popular in the table.
Don't try to make a mole yourself. It's too difficult. It's
Yeah.
like probably 20
20.
ingredients in there. This dry chiles, we cannot find it here in the United States. We can find it, but it's very difficult. So in that can is probably like 20-25 ingredients, more dry chiles. It's not too spicy, but they also have chocolate, of course, peanut butter, garlic, almonds, cinnamon, cilantro, and onion. And, yeah, all together. It's very, very hard to do it and make the right flavor. It's easy to buy and stuff.
Just as in the chocolate traditions you learned, there are recipes and traditions passed down from family to family, different spice combinations and such. And my understanding is the same with mole, is that each family will create a tradition that's passed on from generation to generation. Just out of curiosity, although mole is a different tradition from what you grew up with in Hermosillo, what have you done to make mole your own? Do you have a secret ingredient that you add, or is it too secret?
To be honest with you, we buy the mole in a paste, right? And then we add a couple things. Yes, we do, but we don't do the whole process. It's just a lot.
The couple things that you add, are they your inspiration?
Yeah, we add like five more things to it.
Can you share what those 5 things are, or are they secret? Or the smaller.
Yeah, we buy the paste, right, which is the 20 ingredients, and it's very concentrated. So when to make the mole, the mole enchiladas or mole and pechuga de pollo, we blend it or mix it, of course, in a pot with chicken broth and peanuts and bread or corn. It's 2 choices. Could be corn tortillas, but it has to be
Fried.
fried. The tortilla has to be It doesn't have to be soft. It has to be like hard tortilla. Even if it's old tortilla or like a cheap tortilla chip that we make, that's perfect. So we save that process and we use the tortilla chips and mix it. Of course, it has to be very well blended. And when we eat in the bowl, you're gonna see it outside. It's like a creamy, very, very spicy, or my flavor, because I don't need too much spicy. But the people love it. And that's the way we add all those three ingredients, the chicken broth, the peanuts, and the corn. And in water, of course, because it's very thick. And blend it and then cook it. It's like very, very thick. And when we opened this restaurant, we were so surprised that American people, because it's that 95% of our customers are American, and that was a surprise for us. Like, we thought it was going to be all the Mexican population in our restaurant, but not really. So it's American people, and they always ask for more. And I always tell them, it's very spicy. Oh yeah, that's what I like, and they like it. We have three different salsas on the enchiladas. We have green salsa, red salsa, and mole. And the most popular is mole, and they like it. And we always tell them that it has peanuts, because a lot of people have allergies, right? But that's the only ingredient that has peanuts in the whole restaurant. And it's very popular and delicious.
I have a question. You were talking about texture, and just to go back to Alex for a minute about what's so unique about Mexican-inspired chocolate and the texture. You have some down there. Can you talk a little bit about the process of processing how the chocolate is made and what makes it so unique?
Yeah, sure. So you might recognize, traditionally, you see Mexican chocolate around. It's usually in a round shape like this. This is one of our products that we make. But the actual process of chocolate making in the Mexican tradition, there's more round ones there, it's a really simple process compared to the Europeans. When the Europeans brought cocoa beans over to Europe, for about 200 years, they consumed it the same way that the Mexicans were consuming it at the time Cortez came over and encountered the Aztec civilization there. And then after that, they started applying their technology. You see the little Swiss tinkerer watchmaker. He's thinking, okay, what can I do with this ingredient to really make it something totally different, make it something sweet and delicious? And it was the Swiss and the Belgians who actually made chocolate into candies, and they did it by applying really intensive technology processing to the ingredients to make it really smooth and unctuous and fatty, and they figured out a way to incorporate milk into it to make candy bars. But that's not what was done in Mexico. And the cocoa bean, as Jay was saying, is indigenous to Mesoamerica, or the Americas in general. And the way they grind it is just using simple, either mano y metate, like a little mortar and pestle, a very simple way of grinding, very low technology. And today in Oaxaca, they use these rotary stone mills. And you'll see these rotary stone mills used for grinding corn to make tortillas. You'll see it used for a lot of things, but they have stone mills that are designed, and the stones are just for grinding cocoa. And the grinding process is pretty simple. The beans get harvested from the trees. They get fermented, dried, natural fermentation. The beans then get toasted. And the shell gets removed for more premium chocolates, or it gets left on for just kind of lower quality, more drinking chocolate. Some people prefer to leave the skins on the shell, on the bean, because they think it makes the foam bigger, which is desirable for the drink. They like the foam on the top of the drink. And then basically the whole beans or the nibs will get ground up in these rotary stone mills, mixed with other spices and ingredients when you do that. And then it'll get mixed with sugar, ground again, and then that's it. It's kind of like what I was describing before. So you end up with a chocolate that has a texture that's quite coarse, and the ingredients are much more forward. You end up tasting the real flavor of the ingredients in a much more powerful way, which is one of the reasons I was so attracted to this tradition. It was a very minimal process, really simple, and you really tasted the ingredients in the finished product. So it has this rustic texture, makes it more like food than candy in a way, in your mind, and it had a really powerful flavor, which is what makes Mexican chocolate so unique.
Also, you told me earlier when I was talking with you about how these stones are cut There's, right, when
Yeah.
you studied with somebody apprenticed to a molinero, that there were certain things he wouldn't share, that those are only to go down within the family.
Yeah, so being a miller is something that you kind of, in Oaxaca at least, which is where I have my experience studying under Miller there, is something that is passed down father to son usually, although sometimes other people and friends of the family and their children learn. But basically, the stones get dressed. When I say dressed, when they come to you, they're blank. There's just a blank surface, and you have to dress in the cutting pattern, the grinding pattern for the specific ingredient that you're going to be milling. And different mills are set up with different stones to grind different things. This one's for chilies, this one's for tomatoes, this one's for chocolate. Learning how to dress the millstones was, I think, the hardest part of starting this company. It was challenging because no one wanted to show you their millstones. It's something that everyone keeps secret. And you can walk up and see a mill right in front of you, and the stones are facing each other. You can't see the milling pattern. So you have to remove the stones from the mill in order to inspect the pattern. And no one would do that for me. and I eventually found a miller who helped me. He kind of taught me the basics of how to dress millstones depending on the different things that you were cutting, how many petals to put on the millstone depending on the speed and how fast the ingredient was being incorporated, what type of ingredient it was. And then basically it was a lot of trial and error, a lot of filling the room with smoke when it didn't go right. It's very difficult to operate these mills. It's definitely an artisan process. It's not, you can't just flip a switch and grind something and have it come out all right. It's not as simple as that. You have to know that you have to tension the mill properly, you have to get it started properly, you have to finish the milling properly, and the stones have to be properly dressed. So it's an art form, and it's something that's a lifelong kind of education to learn how to do really well. There's a question?
Yeah, what do you use for a coolant as the stone goes around? It's going to get hot, therefore it's going to affect the chocolate.
So as the mill turns, actually the stones don't touch each other if you're doing it properly. There's constantly product flowing through, keeping the stones just a paper's width apart. Basically the only thing that's cooling it is the new product coming in. So if you have the stones dressed properly, if you have everything dialed in, the speed, everything dialed in, it works beautifully and it never gets that hot. When you don't, you burnish the stones. The room fills with smoke. It's like a catastrophe. I've done it a lot when I was learning. And it's really just keeping it completely dialed in, keeping the tension correct, and that's the art form behind it. Yes.
So do the raw materials come in through the central hall?
Yes. So the nib or the bean will come in through the center. This is like a miniature version because I didn't carry a real one here. The real ones are like this big around and they're really thick and heavy. But basically the beans and the nibs will come through the center, and then one stone turns against the other, and it's like a million scissors constantly cutting like that, and forcing the product from the center towards the outside of the outer radius of the stone. So right between the two stones. There's like a stator stone and a rotor stone. It's very much like a grist mill.
And the stator would not have a hole in the middle, I presume.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't need one. Yeah.
I have a question about the mole sauce. Is it always incorporated in the chocolate, or are there various types of moles?
Just chocolate. And there is like 10 different flavors of mole. And but all the moles, you should have chocolate. You don't have chocolate, it's not mole. So all change, the color change depends what kind of chilies you put. Like some people put the little tomato, the green tomato, tomatillo. So, and then you put a lot of jalapenos, it's gonna turn green.
That's the mole verde. the green mole.
We have mole verde, yellow, black, brown, which is the most popular, and red. So all depends on what kind of chili you put inside.
But mole verde would still have ground chocolate.
Yeah.
Even
That's
though
one
it's
of
green.
the one of the ingredients, just for the color and flavor. Of course, you change some ingredients and to make the mole verde is very good with pork, and also the red mole is good beef, but it could be anything.
With, yes.
So I've spent more of my time eating the sweet processed stuff, so I don't know that much about the actual cacao bean. I'm curious, are there different plants or different types of cacao that have a distinct flavor or in a particular region, or is there basically one cocoa bean?
Well, there's a lot of different cocoa out there in the world, and there's three main varieties that people talk about. There's the criollo, which is considered sort of the original, really smaller pods, smaller beans. Then there's a strain called Forastero, which is from the western Amazon area, we think, originally, and that's a much larger pod, larger bean, more productive, a little bit more resilient to disease, but the flavor isn't quite as good as the criollo. And then there's a third variety, which is a hybrid of those two, called Trinitario. But to answer your question, there's thousands and thousands of varieties even within each of those major strains, and where they grow, what the soil is like, what the climate is like. There's a terroir to it, so you'll end up with different flavor beans in different countries and even in different regions of the same country. You end up with a different type of bean. And then once the bean, of course, is harvested, it's still wet, it has a bunch of fruit around it. It can be fermented, it can be washed, which is the tradition in southern Mexico. You get these really clean, shiny looking beans. Or it can be just straight dried, just out of the pod and not fermented at all. There's a bunch of different things you do that will totally change the flavor profile of the bean. So even with the same bean, you can ferment it, or you can not ferment it, or you can wash it, and you'll end up with totally different flavors. And then you dry it in a very specific way, either sun-dried or mechanically dried, or whatever it is will change it as well. So there's an infinite amount of different flavor you can obtain.
So most of the beans that come to this country are from Mexico or from the Ivory Coast?
Mexico is actually a net importer of beans, so they consume more beans than they farm. So it's difficult to get real Mexican cacao in the U.S. because they use it. They use most of it. But to answer your question about where most of the cocoa beans in this country come from, I'd say West Africa for sure. Ivory Coast, Ghana. They, after the Europeans brought cacao over, they kind of overtook the Americas as the largest producing cacao region in the world. I think they produce about 75% of the world's cacao right now, and the remaining about 20% is produced in the Americas, and then 5% like India and Indonesia. So it's a large amount from West Africa. Most of that is being consumed by what we call the big three. That's Blommer, Archer Daniels Midlands, and Mars. Blommer actually produces all the chocolate for all the cocoa liquor for Hershey. Hershey doesn't process raw cocoa, which most people don't know.
Archer Daniel Midlands, I think of them as soybeans, not cocoa. Who are they producing?
Well, believe it or not, they actually have a plant in Western Mass. They're kind of an evil company, though. So they don't want you to know that. But they produce a large volume of chocolate for industrial users that makes chocolate ice cream, any chocolate flavored stuff.
So,
Well, just to follow up on this question, so is most of the chocolate that you get commercially from fermented beans?
it's oftentimes fermented beans are used in a blend, but it's a combination of unfermented and fermented beans. Like the chocolate that Mars makes, for instance, is made from a blend of predominantly unfermented beans. The fermentation process adds to the complexity of flavor and the fruitiness of the bean, it also adds labor because you have to spend the time and you have to have the facility infrastructure, fermentation boxes, whatever it is, to ferment the beans, dry them, and after the fermentation, it adds about a week to the processing time, which costs money. So manufacturers tend to use less fermented beans or unfermented beans, which you just harvest and dry and ship.
With what we're defining as Mexican chocolate, just I'm curious with Ricardo and Maria, since you grew up in Mexico, Negocio, but you grew up in an area that really wasn't that far from the United States border. When you think of chocolate, do you think of a Hershey bar, or do you think of what we're calling Mexican chocolate? From your own perspective.
I love Hershey's. We know we have good chocolate, but like he was saying, it's true. Mexico is very behind to process cacao, also corn. Right now they are bringing corn for the United States. When we were, like 100 years ago, we do a lot of corn in Mexico. So we know we have very good chocolates in Mexico, but you need to go a little bit to the south. Most of the chocolate bars and stuff, Mexican, they are more in the south, like Puebla or Mexico, the capital.
No, but there is one. I'm always crazy about the chocolate, and you never know when my family comes from Mexico to visit us. I always ask. They always ask me, "What do you want me to bring?" And I always say chocolate. There is one named Carlos Quinto. I don't know if somebody knows them. He's Mexican. It's a candy bar, but it's pure chocolate. It's in different flavors: milk chocolate or dark chocolate. Now it would be rice cream. Those are new, but the real one is Carlos Quinto. Have you heard of that one? Carlos Quinto is so good. It's like very powerful chocolate. And when I eat one, it's like I feel that I don't need anything. It's very small. That's all I need, but they bring me boxes.
And that's funny because Carlos Quinto, one of the kings from
Spain.
From Spain. When the people from Spain came to Mexico, they were there forever. They still there. So they colonized Aztecas, right? And Carlos Quinto was one of the kings.
That came.
They put his name on the chocolate.
That's funny. But that's a very good chocolate. I love Hershey, but I love more Carlos Quinto.
So the mole started with the Aztecas. The word mole means moji. Moji means when you smash the things a lot, like a blended. So moji is a word in Aztec. And then after years and years, the Aztecas they were doing the mole, but they didn't have all the ingredients that we do have right now. After the colonization, when they start to bring a lot of spices from India, China, also for Italy and for Europe, right? Africa. So the people from Spain, they bring a lot of things. So like before, we didn't have the garlic, the cilantro, the oregano, the ajonjolí,
The
season, yeah.
So
all those things, we put it together, but after 100 years. And then when the Aztecas has the mole for a long time, but after 100 years, on the 16th century, they start to making the mole that we have right now, with all the ingredients they came from Europe.
So it's as is so many things with food, it's an evolution. You have something at the core going back to an indigenous culture, changed through colonization, and then changed even for convenience. But Alex, I think you brought something. It's not your chocolate scepter, but this is something that I guess refers back to some of the traditions of the way chocolate was. Could you talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, this is perfect that you just picked this up right where we were in the conversation, because what this is really about is cultural exchange. Because when the Spanish sailed over to the Americas and Cortez started talking with Moctezuma right here, and started dining with him, they shared a lot of things besides disease, and that was the amazing food traditions. So in the Americas at the time, and I'm going to get to this, in the Americas at the time, they had amazing foods that Europe had not been exposed to, that if you think about Europe without these foods, you'd be blown away. Like, think about tomatoes, indigenous to South America. Before Spanish brought them back to Europe, the Italians didn't have tomatoes. Wasn't part of their cuisine at all. And it wasn't until about I think more like the mid 1700s they started really using tomatoes in Italy. Imagine the Irish without potatoes. Potatoes are indigenous to South America as well. Corn, of course, New World food, and same with vanilla beans. Cocoa, of course, and there's all these amazing foods that were here that were brought over, and then of course there are all these amazing foods from Asia and Europe and Africa, foods like coffee, sugar cane, cinnamon, which is now one of the most commonly used ingredients in chocolate. They didn't have that, so over the last several hundred years there's been these amazing exchanges in food traditions and creation of food traditions, and it's ongoing and it's still going. And me bringing Mexican chocolate to Somerville, or these guys bringing mole to Lowell. It's happening right now in front of us, right in front of our eyes. And this thing right here is a molinillo. It's for whisking hot chocolate drinks. So you break up or you cut up or you grate your chocolate, and you heat up some hot water or hot milk on a stove, and you put your chocolate in a pitcher and pour the hot beverage or hot water or hot milk over it, and then you froth it, you whisk it together until it's completely incorporated and it's steaming and there's a nice froth on the top of the chocolate, and then you pour and you serve your taza de chocolate. But the thing that most people think this is a Mexican invention, and it's not. This was invented in Spain for the gentry there to whisk their chocolate drinks, and this was a very specific artifact that was part of, I guess, the ritual of preparing a drink in Spain. Before the Mexican tradition is actually taking two pitchers and pouring and kind of pouring from a great height the fluid back and forth, and it makes the foam and it mixes it very well. And there's also I did an event at the Peabody Essex Museum last summer, and they have a piece of pottery that has a little blowpipe that so you can blow air into the bottom of the pot and mix the chocolate up by blowing air into it. Makes it really froth and foam up. So there's a couple of ways that it was done, but this was Spanish.
I also wanted to say, in terms of the multiculturalism and the sharing of ideas, I've seen very similar devices in India to what you have that's from Spain, and it is interesting to see just through globalization and sharing of ideas, what evolves.
Sure, yeah, it really is fascinating.
Somebody from Colombia put cheese in the bottom of a hot chocolate and used that. That's not done in Mexico, right?
Do you know what was it? Hard cheese?
It was more like a Monterey Jack type consistency. It's like kind of a mild, creamy cheese, so that it would melt.
I've seen chocolate fondue.
Well,
You know, it's funny. I've traveled to a bunch of places because we buy cacao from a lot of different countries. And I was just in Belize, which has a very large Mayan population still. They speak Maya, they speak Quechua, and they make their own. They make chocolate in their own way. They like to use bay leaf and white this plant that is very similar to cocoa, Theobroma bicolor. It has a big white bean. It's not cocoa though, and they'll roast that with the cocoa and grind that up in it. And every place that I've been to, same with the Dominican Republic, they make their own style of chocolate with their own ingredients. Every place that grows cocoa has kind of their own little tradition of things that they make with it. And I've never encountered the cheese one though.
Really?
It sounds good.
I'm curious, it seems like chocolate, at least European perspective, there's almost like this mystique about chocolate, like there's something mystical about it, and I'm wondering if that's true where it came from, that people, like you said, having chocolate every day, if there was something life-giving or invigorating or sexy about chocolate, or if it was just mundane, it was like, you know.
That's a good question.
I think it's the exoticness of chocolate. You know, I think it's always been a relatively expensive indulgence, although, you know, with food industrialization, it's become much more affordable to everyone. But it's something that has to be imported from the tropics. It's something that at times has been very expensive. And it also, there's a lot of history to it. You know, there's a lot there. There's a lot of depth. It's very closely tied to ritual in Mesoamerica. It has played a lot of very important roles in the history of many cultures. So I think also there's been a lot of people in marketing departments that feel that way.
I have two. Or then you and then you. Go ahead.
We talked about food becoming more globalized and constantly evolving to adapt to different countries' tastes. What do you see for the future of Mexican chocolate, both in terms of Mexicans eating chocolate and our concept of Mexican chocolate here in the States?
The only thing I can say about that is if the Mexican culture changed the chocolate in America, I think it would be like a spicy chocolate, different, and a candy because they like spicy here too. But I don't see if he bring all our traditions to the United States. I think he's the only one. The way he's doing it would be great.
Well, and that's part of what I think is at the core of you're introducing ingredients that we don't traditionally associate with Hershey bars. But they are ingredients with the chiles and vanilla that are all found in Mexico with the Taza model that you're using, or?
No, we'll use flavors, like cinnamon is obvious, they do that. Almonds is very common. Chili is common as well, especially in sauces like the mole. But we also grind in ingredients that are not traditional at all. We have a chocolate Mexicano disc that has yerba mate in it, which is a South American herbal tea. We have a chocolate that has vanilla bean is pretty common. Vanilla is indigenous to that area, but
Does
there's
the
one
mate
with
work?
coffee ground into it.
Does the mate work in the coffee, in the chocolate? Does
I
it work
think so.
like mate?
I wouldn't have made it if I didn't think so. But, we have one with coffee ground into it, like a mocha kind of thing, and that's not something you see down there.
I have two questions. On your brochure, that you have that, you mentioned that it's organic.
Yes.
What makes it organic? And what is it about salt that brings out the flavor of chocolate?
Good question. I'm going to answer the last one first because it's easy. Salt just brings out flavor in all foods. If you have a steak with no salt on it, you're missing out on a lot of the steak. I
But
think.
what is about the property of salt in chocolate that makes it so intense?
Well, I think chocolate has sugar in it, or most chocolate does. And when you add salt to that sugar cocoa mixture, it really just brings out a lot of the flavors. I don't really know why that happens, and it's like a mental taste thing,
Right.
And it's chemical, obviously. It just does.
Do you put salt in your chocolate?
Several of our chocolates have salt. Well, a couple of them, but most of these, like this one, doesn't. Most of our discs, only 2 of our discs, I think, have salt in them.
And is there different types of salts that make it better than other salts?
I think the big difference that you taste, because there's so many other flavors going on, is the particles, the size of the salt crystal that would impact the flavor here, because there's so many other flavors going on that any fine flavor aspects to a particular salt would be lost. But I think the crystal size would play a role. But I forgot your first question.
Organic.
Oh yeah, what makes it organic? Great question. So organic ingredients are farmed, certified organic ingredients are farmed without using pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and they're done so in a sustainable way for the environment that the farm is on. We are a USDA certified organic facility where we make our chocolate, and we buy only certified organic ingredients. And what that means is that an inspector will visually inspect a farm, make sure that there's good farming practices happening in an organic way, so that if it's not like the farmer can just hide the pesticides or herbicides when the inspector's there, because the inspector will see how the land is farmed, and they know if that's sustainable based on the way that the land is being farmed, how close the trees are together, what tools are being used, how the land looks, what types of plants are around. It's pretty obvious if someone's using a herbicide or a fungicide when you go to a farm, and you know what to look for. So that's basically how it works. And then we need that certificate that's up to date from the farm before we buy those ingredients to make sure that they're organic. So it's organic. A lot of people kind of talk about it as a marketing term, but it's actually a real thing that makes a really big impact. So that's why we do that.
Do you foresee importation of African chocolate to Mexico for the consumption level down there? And the pricing?
Is that for me?
Anybody?
I don't foresee that because Mexico, the need for, with one exception, the actual consumption of chocolate in Mexico, the types of chocolate that they're using is they like a very specific flavor profile. So they tend to bring in cacao from Guatemala, Honduras, and also the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, places that are nearby. The one exception to that is there are big companies like Nestle and Blommer and big companies that have manufacturing plants in Mexico because the labor there is cheaper and it's really close to the U.S. border. So they'll manufacture in Mexico, and they'll ship beans from all over the world to make their formulas to Mexico. They'll make chocolate products and they'll import them into the U.S. or throughout Latin America. That's the only exception.
We are coming to the end of our time. So, excuse me, Maria and Ricardo, Mr. I always want to call it Senor Jalapeno, but it's Mr. Jalapeno.
Yeah.
Where is it on Merrimack Street?
Yes, it's
124?
124 Merrimack.
124 Merrimack Street. And Alex, for the folks here, if you're all from the Lowell area, where in this area would we be able to find Taza chocolate? Do you know?
That's a great question.
Market Street Market.
Market Street Market, yes, I know that's a customer of ours. So they carry several of our products. If I don't have the list in front of me, but I know you can go to our website and click on the little shopping bag in the upper right-hand corner and see the list by area or zip code or whatever.
And is there a store at the factory in Somerville?
Yes, so we have this brand new factory store where you can actually come. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. On the weekdays, it's 11 to 6. On the weekends, it's 11 to 5. You can sign up for a tour online at tazachocolate.com/tours, and you can book a reservation. You can come down and visit us. So we have a really cool shop where you can get chocolate products that you can't find anywhere out in stores or even on our website.
And it smells amazing when you walk in the door.
Where is this? How are you?
We're on the border of Cambridge and Somerville, right near Union Square, Cambridge, or Inman Square. No, I'm sorry, Union Square, Somerville, or Inman Square, Cambridge on Windsor Street.
What percent cacao are you?
We're a variety of different percentages. We make it all. We make 100% cacao for industrial users. We also make 50, 60, 70, 80% dark chocolates. We can do it all because we're a bean-to-bar chocolate maker, so we can formulate whatever we would like.
One more question, yes.
What's the secret of Lindt and Sprüngli?
The secret of Lindt and Sprüngli.
Yeah,
Yes.
why is their chocolate historically been like the best?
De gustibus non disputanti. Matters of taste are indisputable. I disagree with you.
So do I.
But that's okay. I think I know why you like it, because it's very
I'm not saying necessarily that I think it's the best. I'm saying that it has
perceived
had
as the
the
best.
it has had that reputation on it.
Sure, yeah. I think it's because it's incredibly smooth. It's very fatty. They actually use a lot of different types of fats to give that really indulgent buttery mouthfeel that people really like. So they're inserting more different types of fats in the chocolate.
I see. Okay,
Existing
that's
cocoa.
the answer I was looking for. Not so much saying that it was the best, but
Yeah.
what is it? What is its appeal?
They figured out something about the human taste buds and the tasting experience, and they engineered a product that is really touching, hitting a lot of buttons in your head, making you want to eat it. But Lindt was one of the creators of the original milk chocolate process in Switzerland, and they invented the conch. So they play a very serious and big role in the chocolate making, in the history of European style chocolate making. So they're famous for that too.
Food is an extraordinary expression of culture, not just here in Lowell, the Merrimack Valley, and everywhere. And we hope you enjoyed our exploration of a different look at chocolate through mole, excuse me, Mr. Jalapeno, and through Oaxacan traditions now brought to Somerville, Massachusetts. This is the way we express culture and food at the Folk Festival. This is the way we're trying to express the culture of our community in the Merrimack Valley year-round. If you're interested in seeing more about what we're doing with the Lowell Folk series, we will have the clipboard here. Please leave us your name and your email so we can let you know about other similar events. And then we've also created this brochure. We have different activities coming up. For African American History Month, we have, I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Gandhi dancers, but railroad cadence call traditions have made a huge impact in cadence calls in the military. And we'll be exploring that here at the end of the month. In March, we'll be exploring women's singing traditions, African praise songs to Irish ballads, celebrating the Cambodian New Year in April, and Irish fiddling, step dancing in June, and of course the 25th Folk Festival, Lowell Folk Festival, the last weekend in July. Ricardo and Maria have kindly brought samples of pollo con mole, and we have samples of taza. Both will love to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming, and we invite you to Chocolate Part 2 with our friends across the courtyard, the Brush Gallery at 5:30. It is starting a brand new fundraiser. If you haven't signed up, for $10, you can smother yourself in all the chocolate you desire. And as part of that fundraising, at 7 o'clock, right back here, we'll be showing the film Chocolat with Juliette Binoche and no comments to Quinto chocolate. So thank you so much, and please join us in Visitor Center for samples of Mexican chocolate.